Welcome to Part 40, The Breaking of Idols. Let's just dive right into this historical investigation of how gods among men are manufactured, and honestly, more importantly, how they fall. Today we're unpacking a psychological and structural trap that completely defined the 20th century, the cult of personality. We're going to go all the way from the dramatic teardown of De-Stalinization right up to the eternal cults we still see today in North Korea, so stick with me here because this historical mystery is absolutely fascinating.
Now, the crazy irony here is that the very founder of Marxist ideology, Karl Marx himself, utterly despised the glorification of individuals. You can see it right here in this excerpt from his 1877 letter. He called it personam cultus, and he was dead set against any kind of personal publicity. And yet, in what has to be history's biggest paradox, his followers ended up building some of the most extreme, brutal, and massive personality cults the human race has ever seen. So why? And how exactly did that happen?
If you look at the timeline, it's wild how quickly a regular politician transforms into a manufactured deity, which, as we'll see, eventually leads to a pretty shocking collapse. Right after Vladimir Lenin died in 1924, the Soviet myth-making machine kicked into high gear. Joseph Stalin jumped right into that power vacuum. By his 50th birthday in 1929, the press was already pushing him as this infallible, absolute genius. By 1938, the state was literally rewriting history. But you know, manufactured halos don't last forever. And the biggest turning point came in 1956.
So let's start our investigation right at the scene of the crime, the 1956 20th Party Congress. Picture this. Nikita Khrushchev steps up to the podium and in one fell swoop shatters a terrifying illusion that had been completely locked in for decades. It is, without a doubt, one of the boldest and most decisive moments in modern history.
Khrushchev's secret speech literally shook the world. He broke decades of absolute silence to expose the unchecked violence and the mass atrocities hiding behind that whole Father of Nations propaganda. In this speech, which was titled On the Cult of Personality and Its Consequences, he laid out exactly how glorifying one single guy had pushed the entire country into administrative paralysis and deep, deep fear. He argued the whole setup was fundamentally anti-Marxist. But that begs the question, how did Stalin get all that ultimate power in the first place?
To understand how Stalin's cult was actually built, we kind of need to look at evolutionary psychology and these two models of leadership. On one side, you have the prestige style, like Confucius, right? The leader influences through knowledge and good deeds, and the followers respect them willingly. But on the flip side is the dominant style. Think Machiavelli. It's far safer to be feared than loved. Dictators deliberately use this dominant style. They create a climate of threat and coercion, simply because a passive, terrified population is way easier to control than trying to persuade a society of free thinkers.
Because look, a cult doesn't just pop up overnight by accident. According to sociologist Adrian Theodore Papon, it requires a very precise three-step recipe of social engineering. First, you've got patrimonialism, basically taking total control of resources so you can buy loyalty with state money. Step 2 is systematically falsifying culture, meaning you rewrite history so every single national triumph is credited to the ruler. And finally, you completely eliminate dissidence, total eradication of political pluralism and independent journalism. Without all three, a full-blown cult just can't get off the ground.
And as we dig deeper, you see how the state actively manufactured their own reality. Historian Pierre Dubois du Nillac points out that the Kremlin didn't just destroy old archives to keep the ruler's image spotless. They literally invented new, fake documents and altered photos. They were photoshopping people out of existence before Photoshop even existed. Citizens were even forced to rewrite their own personal memoirs to match the cult's ideology. It wasn't just lying, it was a complete reconstruction of reality.
But how is a modern totalitarian cult different from, say, ancient kings? Well, historian Jan Plamper explains that, unlike ancient god-kings who claimed divine right, modern cults are totally secular and rely on this illusion of popular support. Their target audience is massive. They go after every class, every age group, and most importantly, they lean heavily on mass media like radio and newspapers. They absolutely have to monopolize the media, making sure no rival narrative or rival leader ever reaches the public.
There's actually a super deep psychological trap at play here called terror management theory. Basically, leaders deliberately manipulate our existential dread. They constantly hype up threats, crises, and enemies in society. And when humans are reminded of our own mortality, we psychologically panic and seek a safe haven. We run straight into the arms of a charismatic authoritarian leader who promises absolute safety. People literally hand over their freedom just to feel secure.
Now combine that fear with how our brains are literally hardwired. Scientists call it the Hyperactive Agency Detection Device, or HAD. It means we naturally assume that behind any big, complex, or unexplained event, there's a conscious, powerful agent pulling the strings. We are programmed to think someone is in control. So when you mix this natural human bias with state-manufactured fear, you get a population biologically primed to worship a centralized, all-powerful leader.
But here is the million-dollar question. Once that psychological trap is set and the almighty leader dies, how do you erase a manufactured god? Well, that brings us to the fascinating process of de-Stalinization. The immediate fallout from that 1956 secret speech was a massive physical and ideological teardown. The symbols that used to make the public feel secure were literally bulldozed overnight. Cities were renamed, like wiping the concept of Stalinador right off the map. Those falsified 1938 history books were pulled from schools, and across the entire country, thousands of statues were yanked down by cranes. It was a brutal but necessary way to shock the society into remembering that the country runs on collective leadership, not the worship of one man.
Which leads us to a really fascinating historical anomaly in our investigation. The Soviet Union smashed its idol, but on the other side of the world, another idol stayed standing. If Stalin's massive cult could be dismantled, why on earth did Kim Il-sung's cult in North Korea survive? And why is it still going strong today? The contrast here is absolutely mind-blowing. While the Soviet illusion shattered under Khrushchev, North Korea took a totally different path. Stalin was secretly denounced just 3 years after he died. His legacy was erased. But the North Korean regime, instead of letting the system collapse, they literally declared Kim Il-sung the eternal president after he died. Rather than dismantling the cult, they just expanded it and passed it seamlessly down to his heirs. It's still very much alive today.
So how did North Korea pull that off? They weaponized the deeply ingrained Confucian concept of familialism. See, the leader there isn't just a politician. He's framed as the ultimate father figure of the nation. This fatherly image allowed them to set up a seamless hereditary monarchy, passing power to Kim Jong-il and then Kim Jong-un, completely dodging the succession crisis that ruined Stalin's legacy. The pervasiveness there goes way beyond Stalin or Mao. Even today, failing to show the proper emotional devotion to the state is a severely punishable offense.
As we wrap up this historical case file, we really have to ask ourselves a tough question. In our modern algorithm-driven world, with a 24-hour news cycle and digital echo chambers, are we actually engineering the perfect conditions for the next generation of unchallengeable idols? Is technology protecting us from personality cults, or is it just building new, invisible digital platforms for them to thrive? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you next time.